afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our exciting new virtual Village Hall Film Club. If you're a fan of the big screen and all things movie related, you've come to the right place, as you'll find all sorts of exclusive content here at our new film club. Now, it's a privilege to have the opportunity to chat today with Dominic Cooke, director of The Courier, a new Cold War thriller that opens in UK cinemas on the 13th of August. The Courier stars Benedict Cumberbatch, and hopefully you've all seen the trailer that we've been playing in the virtual Village Hall this week. Dominic, thank you so much for joining us today for our new film club. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Now, The Courier is based on the real-life story of Greville Wynne, a British travelling salesman who's pulled unexpectedly into the dangerous world of Cold War espionage and the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a really gripping tale that defies belief. Could you tell us a bit more about the story behind the film?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've covered it. Essentially, what was going on at the time is that the CIA and MI6 had some really bad failures in their attempts to get inside the Soviet military system, and a lot of their operatives had been arrested or killed. And so they were looking for someone to go over there who had a legitimate reason to be in that part of the world, a civilian, who would have a great cover and therefore would not be suspicious to the Soviet authorities. And they had had a contact from someone very, very high up within the military system there. He was a war hero and a colonel, and his name was Oleg Penkovsky, and he had sort of fallen out of love with the Soviet system and had access to extraordinary volume of military secrets and was prepared to give them to the West. So they approached a guy called Greville Wynne, who was an engineer by trade, but he was selling sort of factory equipment, manufacturing equipment to the Eastern Bloc. And they asked him to go over there and courier back bits of information, photographs and so on. And at first he didn't know what he was bringing back, but eventually he got more and more involved until he became instrumental in putting an end to the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, because he basically brought back information that ended up on Kennedy's desk, and that information proved that the Soviets were lying about the level of their military capability, and therefore they weren't the risk that the West thought they were. And so Kennedy was able to sort of put an end to the Cuban Missile Crisis through the information he got from Greville Wynne. So it's really the story of how someone very regular ended up being a real player in a very important historical moment.
Yeah, it's incredibly interesting. And Greville, as we've mentioned, is played by Benedict Cumberbatch. Why did you feel that the actor was so well suited for the part of Greville?
Well, Benedict, I worked with him a few times before, so I knew him quite well, and I sort of knew what he was capable of. And I had a feeling that he would be really good at sort of playing that restraint, that sort of buttoned up, mid-century British archetypal sort of guy with deep feeling underneath the surface. So I didn't want him to be the sort of stuffed shirt guy who was, you couldn't see into. He needed to have both that reality of how people were then, which was that they were trained to sort of not express feeling and not show what they were thinking, but he needed to have sort of vulnerability under the surface. So I thought he'd be perfect for that. Unfortunately, he liked the script and agreed to do it.
Yeah, brilliant. It was fabulous. And Wynne was an ordinary man, essentially, to start with, who was prepared to put himself in an extraordinary position for that greater good. What kind of message do you feel that the film has?
Well, it sort of does, in a way you sort of answer the question, because it's really about how ordinary people are capable of doing extraordinary things, how we don't really know what we're capable of often until we're put into an extreme situation. And also about the possibility of people from incredibly different backgrounds, cultures, being able to find a common purpose and being able to sort of get beyond their differences. Because the fact is, these two men made a really strong connection with one another, and both in the film and in real life, they had an intense sort of admiration for each other and a deep connection, which, on some level goes way beyond, or it does go way beyond what their lives were, into who they really were in a sort of on a deep level. And I think those things are so important now, especially as it turns out, when the film is coming out at a time where we've all been sort of locked away in our own separate worlds, and only communicating sort of through the internet, how important it is to be able to sort of connect beyond our own little worlds in order to change things and make them better, which is what these two guys did, you know.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Now, we've also got some questions from our virtual villagers who have got a few to put forward to you, if that's okay, Dominic. So, first of all, we've got a question from Anna. She says, how and when did you first come across this story? And, you know, she says it looks really interesting.
Well, thank you. I to be honest, I didn't know anything about it till I read the script, which was, I think, sometime in late 2015. And when I read the script, I didn't even know it was a true story as I was reading it. And then I got to the end and I looked it up and discovered it was a true story. And I was sort of amazed that we didn't know about it, because, I mean, these two guys saved us from nuclear annihilation. So it doesn't get much more heroic than that. But there were reasons why at the time it sort of disappeared out of the public eye. I mean, Wynne and Penkovsky were widely known at the time. It was a huge news story. But Wynne became a bit of a sort of thorn in the Secret Service's side, because when he came back, he lost a lot of his business interests because they were all in the Eastern Bloc. And he compensated for that by being a bit of a sort of loudmouth, going on chat shows, talking about his operations, writing books which were sort of partially true. And MI6 really said, you've got to stop doing this. They were giving him a pension, so they had some sort of power over him, and he agreed to do that. But I think the result of that was that they didn't dare sort of bring the subject up again in case he sort of said stuff that they didn't want him to say. So I think there are reasons why, you know, to people of a certain age, you know, he's really well known, but to people younger than that, no one knows the story. And it's a sort of important thing for us making the film to be able to tell the world that these two guys did something really incredible, and they deserve to be known for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that leads nicely into another question we've had through, which is that the Cold War was obviously such a fascinating period in history. You guys must have had some really interesting research for the film. How did you go about that? And was it difficult given the kind of secretive nature of the events happening at the time?
It was quite difficult to get to the bottom of what really happened, because there are so many speculations about it. And at the time, and soon after, there were quite a lot of books written about it and stuff talked about, but they weren't really based in fact, because the facts weren't really accessible. In the 90s, however, the CIA opened all of their files. And so there is a really, really good book called The Spy Who Saved the World that was written soon after that. Very big, detailed book, which is all about Penkovsky and everything he did. And it's based on eyewitness accounts and the records that the CIA had. But even the sort of myth of the people and the myth of the stories were interesting. And I found, because one of the things I was like trying to work out quite early on was, well, why do these two guys have so much in common? I mean, you know, you've got Wynne, who was from a working class Welsh background, living in this sort of more upper middle class life in London, but pretty sort of basic. You know, he was a salesman. He wasn't an exceptional person. And then you had Penkovsky, who was a military hero, who'd been decorated 13 times, very much responsible for, or a leading player in keeping the Nazis out of Kiev, which was a very important strategic moment in the Second World War. And you know, he was famous in Russia, this guy, as a military hero, and right at the top of society. So what was it that they had in common? And the more you drilled into their own sort of personal lives, you realized that they actually were both people who saw themselves as outsiders, that didn't feel like they fitted for various reasons in the world they lived in. And so that was one of the things I think that they sort of unconsciously connected over. So all of that research was so useful in fleshing out the script, which was already carefully researched. You know what I mean? The Tom O'Connor, the writer, had already really sort of grappled with the material and shaped it into something as close to the truth as it's possible to be in 2 hours.
Of course, yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you. We've got another virtual villager. Julie has said, "Hi, Dominic. Was the film made on location in Russia?"
No, it wasn't. We made half the film in London, and obviously half it's sort of set in London. But we also shot some interiors for Russia in London, and then we went to Prague, which is. There are a lot of pragmatic reasons around this. You know, there are certain countries that have a really good infrastructure for making films, and you know, making films is a complicated beast. And Prague. We went to where else we go? We went to Kiev, which was fascinating, and we went to Belarus. We went to Minsk. We nearly shot some of it in Minsk, but you sort of need an infrastructure or a system which is sort of set up to make films. And in fact, at that time, without wishing to be too controversial, Czech Republic and UK were both in the EU, which made the whole thing far less complicated in terms of visas and all that stuff. So we ended up shooting there, and it was great. It was great. And then we did use CGI from Russia, and I have been to Russia a lot, so I used my own knowledge and experience of the place to sort of help make sure that the details were there. We had a brilliant design department they actually went to Russia and brought a lot of the props back. You know, we tried to make sure that at least, you know, in the sort of detail of the day-to-day life, the props and the furniture and so on was authentic, to give it a really sort of accurate feeling.
Yeah, it did, and it looked incredible. It can't be easy to recreate that film of that feel of 1960s era Soviet Union. So it looked incredible. Another question we've had from a virtual villager, from Manmohan. Are you ever tempted to get in front of the camera?
No, I did do a bit of acting when I was a student. And I'm really interested in acting, and I think a director has to have an understanding of what an actor is going through to help them. So I sort of feel like doing a little bit of acting as a student was a really good thing to do, and I think anyone who directs should do some acting, even if it's just in an amateur way, in a very quiet way, because you sort of know the terror of being an actor. Apart from anything, no, I don't really feel sort of skilled enough, and I think but it's a strange thing, isn't it? You don't necessarily need to be good at something to be able to help other people be good at it, and we know that from sort of football managers. The good ones can really make a difference, and they don't necessarily have to have been players to do so. So but no, I think the world would not really appreciate that if I did it. So
Oh, I'm sure you're being modest, but yeah, thank you for your honesty. Now, an important part of the film was the depiction of the relationship between Wynne and Penkovsky. How did you go about conveying this as director?
Well, of course, so much is in the script. You know, I mean, I come from a theatre background where I've largely worked with new plays, and I've worked a lot with many writers, both as a sort of as a director myself, but as also a producer of new plays. And for me, the script is always the answer, and if it's not in the script, it won't be in the film. So you have to make sure, and I think one of the things we did when we sort of when I came aboard, the script was sort of written, but we made changes, and one of the things we did was to sort of make sure that there's clarity in the script about this relationship between these two men. And so that was sort of there. And then in the casting, it was about finding sort of people that would instinctively thought would connect. And then we had a very important period of rehearsal. It wasn't a long period, but it was probably about a week with Benedict and Mirab, who plays Penkovsky, together. And we sort of really drilled into what it is with these two guys that is similar, and why is it that they look up to each other and admire one another so much. And we did that with a mixture of what was in the script and what we also had found out in research. And so by the time they came on set, and also they're basically nice guys, so they're sort of able to just sort of understand that the connection was important. And chemistry is not easy, but you can help it as a director. You can help it, because if the actors sort of understand what it is that the characters are seeing in one another and why they connect, that sort of gives them something to work with. but it was a crucial thing for the film, I think, that they did connect, and they believed that they sort of liked one another, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. They were fantastic together. Another question we've had from Catherine is, what tips might you give to unknown actors that are looking to break into film?
It's such a hard profession. It's so tough. You have to take so many knocks, and so many good people struggle to get the breaks. I mean, I think there are two things you need to do. One is try and get better in what you're doing. And I think, of course, you know, banging on the door and being seen is something you want to try to do, but that's quite hard. So you've got to sort of use every opportunity you can to sort of develop your craft. And for my money, being good at something is a lifelong, an art especially, is a lifelong journey. So you don't, I feel I'm learning stuff all the time. And in fact, I'm not really that interested in doing things where I don't learn something. You never arrived at a place where everything is great and everything's fine. And so constantly try and find ways, whether it's doing little shows on stage or, you know, making short films with friends. If you don't have the opportunities, try and make them for yourself, or studying acting, doing classes. I really believe in that. And the other thing is to sort of develop a degree of emotional tenacity and strength that takes you beyond the sort of the knocks that you will experience. Because I think one of the things that's so tough with acting is it is a very competitive profession, but it is something where it's you're going into that room for an audition, you're on tape doing the audition, you're on screen or whatever, and everyone gives their opinion, and it can be tough. And you have to have ability to sort of focus on why you're doing it beyond what other people think of you. You have to develop sort of self-esteem in a way in order to keep growing and stay vulnerable. So those are the two things. I know that's not sort of answering how you open the door for other people to see you, but I really believe in, if you're really good and if you just stick at it, someone will find you and give you opportunities. But just, you've got to keep growing, which is easy said and done, I know.
Oh, well, that's brilliant, thank you. And then probably time for one last quick one, which is quite interesting. So we've had a question, which is, how has filmmaking changed over the last 5 years? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I mean, the way that films are seen has changed, because especially during lockdown, because people are watching them far more on small screens. I hope that people will return to movie theatres, because for me, I love watching films on small screens. And I mean, one of the joys for me in the lockdown has been sort of, my partner and I have completely expanded our knowledge of world cinema. We've watched so many movies some of which we've seen before, many which we haven't. So it's a wonderful thing. But for me, being in a cinema, when you're all concentrated, there are no distractions, you're watching one thing together with other people, is a brilliant experience. So in a way, that has changed. I think the great advances are in sort of computer technology. And one of the things that I've noticed since I started, which has been massive shift, is the improvement in CGI, which is now a big feature of a lot of films. I've always been sort of skeptical about it, because I think if you don't have a really big budget, which I haven't done, it's very hard to make CGI images that feel real. Whereas this film, we've created a huge amount, actually, in terms of backgrounds and, say, the exterior of Moscow that is CG, and you really wouldn't know. And we don't have the budget to spend on these independent movies, you know, huge amounts. But the journey from when I first started doing On the Hollow Crown in 2014, maybe 2015, the difference in quality is amazing, and it's brilliant. I think, to me, there's never quite the same. Being in a real place always adds something, but the fact is that it sort of opens possibilities up for making interesting and ambitious films and television without having to spend a fortune on locations, when you can recreate places or sort of imagined worlds economically and convincingly for audiences. So for me, that's a massive change and a really good one.
Yeah, absolutely. It must have opened so many creative doors. But that's all of our questions. We must bring it to a close now. Dominic, thank you ever so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you, and we wish you every success when the Courier opens at the UK cinemas next week. So thank you, Dominic, and thank you everyone for tuning in today.
Thanks, Melissa. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.